a life or on a livelihood. There was little doubt back in the 60s that Martin Loney would end up on a list. He was a student radical in British Columbia. Even when he later took a job in government, he wound up on another list, as he recently discovered.
Of more concern, however, is the presence within certain government departments and agencies, particularly CMHC, of a small group of former campus revolutionaries. This group was led until recently by Martin Loney.
This is a letter from a minister, prepared with input from the RCMP.
Loney has returned to the United Kingdom to accept a teaching position, but his disciples remain. This is deranged nonsense. I mean, the idea that people would be my disciples.
The letter identified more than 20 civil servants as Martin Loney's radical disciples, what they called an extra-parliamentary opposition, some of whom to this day prefer not to be identified. Robert Rabinovich has no problem being outed. Then a Privy Council bureaucrat in Ottawa, he would survive the stain of having been formally identified as a potential threat. But he still has no idea how he got that designation in the first place. Who was Martin Loney?
I never met him. I've never had any contact with Martin Loney. I knew of him. He was a legitimate radical. And he went on, from what I know, to university and was a radical force in university. But he wasn't a threat to the state.
Rabinovich went on to senior jobs in the public service, including a stint as president of the CBC.
That the conditions do not build on our strengths, such as news and current affairs.
But even now he finds it sobering to think about the potential impact of an unsubstantiated allegation.
It scares me that somebody would sign it. I'm sure it was drafted by the RCMP at the time. It scares me that a minister would sign it. It is one thing for the state, through its agencies, to look into people who may be a threat to the state. It's another thing to understand the difference between a threat to the state and legitimate disagreement.
When we come back, new times, new threats, new targets. PROFUNC, brainchild of a war mentality. Initiated in 1950, it was a plan for a massive roundup of left-wing radicals in the name of national security. The program would eventually die of old age in the 80s, mercifully put to sleep by someone who didn't even know that it existed.
I, Robert Philip Kaplan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear.
Bob Kaplan became Canada's Solicitor General in 1980. He was a Liberal MP from Toronto. He started getting calls from irate constituents, old-timers getting turned back at the U.S. border. Something about security.
And so some of these elderly people were, because of things that had happened in their past, working maybe for a communist newspaper in Toronto or being involved in the labor movement or whatever, had resulted in them being identified as a threat to the national security, and they weren't being admitted to the United States because of that.
There were enough complaints that he decided to raise the issue with the RCMP. As Solicitor General, the force was under his jurisdiction.
Well, they were saying that one of the people on the list was invited to come to Moscow to some type of annual conference, and he was invited by the embassy to go, and that this kind of proved that there was still a little bit of life left in this threat to our national security. And I remember the commissioner and I sort of looked at each other.
In 1983, he finally instructed the Mounties to stop whatever they were doing that was causing border hassles for superannuated communists and lefties. What he didn't realize was that his instructions would effectively kill a 33-year-old program that he was unaware of until we told him.
I'm just appalled to hear that, and I just can't believe that that had any government authorization behind it. And I'm very proud that my name is on the order to shut that program down.
The PROFUNC plan, with its mass arrests, its draconian detention, its orders to shoot people, seems so quaintly yesterday. But there's nothing yesterday about national security. It's everywhere today. In the 50s, it was communism. Today, it's radical Islam. It's assorted liberation movements, freelance anarchists. In the 50s, it was mostly the Mounties watching. Today, it's the RCMP, CSIS, and more than 20 departments and agencies of government with so-called national security responsibilities. It's an eclectic list. Border services and CSIS, not surprising. But how about Health Canada, food inspection, heritage, revenue? They're all engaged in the collection and the storage and the exchange of information about Canadians, often without oversight. Ian Ferrier, a musician and poet who lives in Montreal, got a recent glimpse of how the system works. It began earlier this year with a knock on his front door. The visitor was from CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service.
I asked him, you know, why are you here? And that's when he said he was asking about my friend Stefan.
Stefan Christophe.
Yeah.
Stefan Christophe is 29 years old, but he's part of a tradition as old as the idealism that has always motivated radicals. He writes for alternative media, does research for assorted clients. He shows up at demonstrations. He's a veteran of street politics.
They are basically denying the right for people to move freely across national borders.
He supports a wide range of causes very publicly.
Voices must be heard!
That's the whole point of dissent, being seen and being heard, and being fearless.
He says police hit him with a steel baton.
So why would CSIS have to spy on him?
I think that the majority of people in Canada do not agree with a government-funded agency spying on Canadian citizens who are involved in democratic activity, period.
Christophe moved to Montreal 10 years ago. He and Ian Ferrier bonded over music and political causes. What were the questions like?
Well, I guess the one that he kept coming back to is Stefan violent in any way?
Is Stefan violent?
Yeah, that's what.
And your answer was?
Well, I mean, hell, he could babysit my kids. He's not a violent man. He's the opposite of that.
So there was never a moment of doubt, oh my God, I know somebody that I should be worried about?
No, none at all. It was more, I was hurt that he was asking questions about him, you know.
It was the last he'd hear from CSIS, but before the agent went away, he had a quiet warning.
Before he went away, he said, I hope you're going to keep this confidential. And I said, you should have told me that before we had this conversation, because then we wouldn't have had the conversation, you know. And I'm about to phone my friend Stefan, and are they bugging his phone?
It was completely unacceptable what they did. It's something that irks you deeply. When they mention details about your life, intimate details, I think it's quite grotesque, to be honest.
CKUT 90.3 FM, this is World Skip the Beat. It's just after noon.
He would learn that CSIS called on 7 of his friends. Most felt threatened. All but one felt too vulnerable to talk to us about the visits.
You know, on the record, CSIS will always say that you're not obliged to speak to CSIS. But when the agents are in practice, they force themselves, you know, not in a physical way, but you can do a lot of forcing through the tone of your words and your demeanor, and I think they're very well trained in that.
Could this have been the reason for the interest in Christophe? The G20, the economic summit of world leaders in Toronto in late June. This would be one show that Stefan Christophe wasn't going to miss, a rare opportunity for dissent on a global platform. The visits to his friends, the indiscreet inquiries, could have been designed to send a message. We'll be watching you. CSIS has declined to clarify. So CSIS would say, what's your problem? We're just asking questions. Reporters ask questions, you ask questions, you've taken a side in a debate, and we have questions. So?
There are many sides to political debate, but a secret government spy agency shouldn't be a legitimate side to that political debate. I want to live in a society where we discuss issues openly, publicly, right? It makes you angry. And when they start intervening in a way that, you know, you would imagine happened in another era, or it seems like it's from a spy novel.
The best spy stories are the ones we never hear about. Nothing happened. People spied upon our most often none the wiser. But as a boy, Jim Laxer always felt his family was being watched. In time, he forgot about it. Nothing happened. Times changed. Now he knows about the PROFUNC operation and finds himself reliving juvenile anxieties, seeking answers to questions that he couldn't even have articulated more than 50 years ago.
What should we, when we put all those things together, how should we regard what's going on around us now?
I think we got to regard it with very real concern. And I think what we have to do is to try to deconstruct this kind of surveillance state that's being put into place.
He has asked the RCMP, the CIA, and Canada's National Archives for access to files collected in the years of spying on his family. Chances are he'll be in for a long wait. PROFUNC was a 33-year program that monitored tens of thousands of unsuspecting Canadians at unimaginable cost. Officially, it never happened. If you suspect that you or a member of your family might have been a target for detention or even a person of interest under the PROFUNC plan, you can go to our website for information on how to proceed. Or you can go directly to the RCMP, CSIS, or the Canadian Archives with a formal request for access to files. A caution: don't hold your breath while waiting for results. Welcome back to the Fifth Estate. If you'd like more information about our stories, you can visit our website at cbc.ca/fifth. This week we have some special details about how to reach the government if you're seeking security records about yourself. We show you which agencies you may wish to contact and how to do it. A look now at some stories